Before we move on to installing and using Bundler to manage the versions of our gems that we're using for SAS and the one SAS extension that we've installed, let's come back to SAS briefly and explore how we know what we know. So if you're trying to figure out how to do something in SAS, or you're trying to explore what other things you might do in SAS that you haven't even thought of yet, a good place to start is the SAS site. Again, that's sas-lang.com. And if you click on the Learn SAS, this takes you to a page that explains the basics. And as we go down here, you'll see that many of the things that are listed here are ones we've already covered. So for example, we've talked a little bit about what pre-processing means. Basically, it means we get to use a more intuitive syntax and we get to use programming tools inside of our CSS before it gets rendered as CSS for the browser. As we scroll down, it talks about variables, which is one of the first things that we talked about, and you can see an example of how it works. As we scroll down, it talks about nesting. We've used nesting at this point to allow ourselves to string together selectors without having to repeat the selector names. And we've even gone so far as to use the ampersand to prepend the outermost selectors to the nested selectors. And as we scroll down a bit more, it talks about partials. We've used partials now for our components, and we've broken down our other styles into two other partials, one for variables and one for the base. We've used import in order to pull in those partials. Let's scroll down. And then mix-ins are where we've ended. So we haven't talked about mix-ins. And as you scroll down, the other parts here, extending and inheriting, and using operators, are also things that we haven't used yet. These are kind of more on the programming side of SAS, where we get to create things like functions to allow us to plug in one value and return another value based on certain calculations, or taking a value and generating several CSS properties from that single value. Now, if you want to dive even deeper, you can go over to the documentation, which we've been to before when we were learning about how to watch for changes in SAS files so that it will render the CSS automatically right after the change. If you look at the table of contents, it's not super extensive. It goes down to 12 chapters here. And a lot of these are things that you probably won't need for a while. But if you're excited about SAS and want to dive in deeper, this is a good thing to just read through.